I wanted to dig into a move that Bach used in one of his fugues in D minor. This particular sound and movement has been used in horror films and vampire films, right? And even Garth Hudson from the band used concepts from this particular fugue in the song Chest Fever as an intro where he played the organ. Now, Bach wrote this for organ, but this can be laid out in a way for orchestra or even for like rock bands, splitting these parts amongst multiple instruments. That's up to you how to use the orchestration. I want to talk about what's happening here and what's making this work that creates the tension and what creates the feeling of such strong release. And we do really have a strong sense of release when this chord finally breaks. Let's listen to the sound of this classic chord. Okay, so the first thing happening here is we're going to see that in the third stave. This is written for the pedal on an organ, like on a pipe organ, that were played with your feet. And it's just a ringing, or we call it a pedal tone, a pedal D note that rings the whole time. The fugue is in D minor. In this particular moment in the piece, he's modulating to D major for just a brief period. Okay, we're going to work our way into that D chord, so we need to have, I don't know, some tension in order to release to the one for a nice cadence. Okay, this is very common in this era. They were very into creating tension and finding ways to release it. In 20th century harmony and the Impressionistic period, people started moving away from traditional cadences and traditional tension and release. But in this era, it was so much about how you got into tensions and how you got out of them so that they felt perfectly resolved. And this is an example of that, but he does pull a little bit of a trick here that you don't always see, but you do see in some of the Bach era, right? Okay, so that D pedal tone at the bottom. On top, we're going to play this C sharp diminished seventh chord, okay? Now, this is just a straight up C sharp diminished seventh chord with the 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7th, okay? He extends the arpeggio up a tenth, okay? Now, it's just a longer movement of the triad, and you actually see this stacking effect happening here, where the first note gets added and then it rings for the entire time, and then the second note gets added and it rings on top of it for the whole time. So we're creating this this ladder stacking effect here, where the notes build up on top of each other, and by the end of it, we actually end up with 6 notes on top of our pedal tone. So that's a 6 note. The density of that chord involves 6 voices. And just real quick, I'd like to mention that if you're digging this video, please subscribe to my channel. I have a lot of other videos on music, music theory, composition, and gear. And you've liked the video, leave me comments. It really helped me out a lot. Also, you could find me at anatomyoftone.com. Okay, so we have this 6-note voicing of a C sharp diminished 7th chord. So already we know that this is a fairly dense chord, and we can actually see how close the intervals are together. Speaking of how close the intervals are together, this brings up a really interesting point about one other thing that adds a little extra level of density and tension to this particular voicing. You'll see that this low C sharp is right below D3. We don't often voice chords in thirds or intervals in thirds below D3. Once you start to get below D3, we start to hear a lot of the harmonic overtones on top of the notes, and they start clashing together a little bit more. The higher up the notes are, the less of the harmonic overtones series you hear, because they get cut off because they start going above the limit of the human hearing. But low, they start to get a little cluttered and they can start to sound dense. Well, Bach uses this to his advantage because he wanted to build what is already somewhat of a tense chord, which is a diminished 7th chord, has some tension to it, and you can even hear this in like old silent films with player pianos, where they would use diminished chords a lot, like when they tied somebody up and put them on the railroad tracks, right? And you would often hear like diminished chords being used, diminished seventh chords being used. This creates tension, right? And so there's inherently tension built into this chord. Now, put it in the register that it's in. We're adding more tension because of the overtones, right? And the 6-note density, all the notes being a third apart. And we never get above E4 here, right? So it's pretty dense. That paired with the D pedal tone, right? And if we look at the first note that gets added in our C sharp diminished seventh chord, it is actually a major seventh away from our pedal tone. So this is a dissonant move right there. The first note that gets added in our arpeggio is a seventh away from the pedal tone, which is intense, right? Okay, now how is this going to get resolved? Okay, I think of this first chord sound really sounds like I imagine like a real menacing thunderstorm with really dark, mean clouds, right, that are just hovering, and it just seems like something really intense is going to happen and you should seek shelter. That's what this sound reminds me of. I think it's really important to get visual associations with sound. Makes you think about how to use them as your storytelling later on. Your music is storytelling, and any of these sounds, they do evoke emotions. So for yourself, it's good to associate what kind of emotion they represent for you, and it can inform you later of when it might be good to use them. Okay, so with that being said, well, the storm is going to clear, right? And it does in this piece, and it clears to a D major chord. It's a tonic. So this whole C sharp diminished chord, which is a leading tone chord, it works because it's based on the 7th degree of the scale, and it pushes up to the tonic, right? So it's a half step away from the tonic, and it wants to push upwards. It's called a leading tone. Well, we could build a chord on that leading tone to create even more tension, and that is called a leading tone chord. We built the chord based off of C sharp, the leading tone, into our D major scale. Well, this particular version of the leading tone chord is built from the harmonic minor scale. We see that because it has the B flat in it. So its origins are in the D harmonic minor scale, and it is almost really in later times, genres, eras, we actually see this can turn into an A7 flat 9 chord. It's almost implying an A chord, a 5-to-1 resolution, so a leading tone chord can have dominant function where it almost feels like a 5-to-1 cadence, right? And that's what's going on here. It feels a lot like a dominant to tonic resolution, but it's a little fancier move than that, right? It doesn't sound as plain. It's a little more exciting, okay? So we're going to move from this leading tone chord into the tonic in D major. Okay. Now, let's discuss what works about the tonic. Right? There's a couple of things. D is still happening in the pedal tune, and the D chord is going to be has the root's going to be at the bottom, third, and then fifth eventually, right? So it's a root position D chord, which is its strongest voicing. Okay, so immediately the voicing is going to be strong. We change density from a 6-note chord voicing to a 4-note voicing. It's just in the number of voices that are in the chord, it slims down, and that creates a little bit more lightness to it. We don't just switch to the major 1 chord here, okay, we actually change the size of it. So this is something to think about in production, and I think growing up as a rock musician and didn't realize until getting into orchestration and classical composition how much the density of chords and adjusting the density of chords, meaning how many voices are in them, can actually change the dynamic of it, right, or the intensity of it. This is very strategic here, right? Dark, murky, intense clouds, clear skies. Right? Now, to further this even more, because Bach is always working on multi-levels at the same time, right? We actually have a 4-3 suspension here. That means that the D chord starts on a D sus4, Right? So we have a D, G, A here. The D is just doubled on top, and that 4 often moves down to the 3. That's why I'm calling it a 4-3 suspension. He uses an interesting move. He uses an enclosure here. He goes G, E, F sharp, right? We basically have enclosed that F sharp note with a 4, and this is actually a 2 suspension, right? It's a 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3. It actually is on either side of it, there's a suspension happening that when it goes to the major third, it creates a really nice release. You could just do it by just going straight into the third, but using these what they call ligatures in species counterpoint or just suspensions, it just creates a nice extra sense of release when it finally gets into that major chord. How you might use this in your own compositions? Well, think about pedaling the tonic, right? And then using in some way either the dominant chord with a flat 9 on top or a leading tone chord that's a diminished 7th chord resolving to the tonic, right? You could, of course, experiment with different registers and different ways of entering the notes. Right here, Bach just goes straight up the arpeggio, but you could potentially rearrange the order that the notes come in. Right? You can start with the full chord and slowly release the notes. There are a number of different ways that we can creatively use this in our own compositions. I think the big takeaway is the pedal tone with the leading tone chord on top of it resolving to the tonic. Right? Over that D pedal tone, it's such a dense, thick sound that creates that extra level of tension. Okay, let's check out this chord. So here's our D pedal, right? And I'm going to grab this C sharp. See right there? There's that dissonance I was talking about. We're going to build the C sharp diminished 7th chord on top now. Right? There's our chord. Right, so that's not horribly dense, but it's definitely more dense than. That's cleaner, right? Let's take this. That's pretty dense. Let's try it here. See how much cleaner it is, right? That's really clean. But down below, we really get this. Now, let's look at where he moves to. He's going to move up to this voicing. Right? Check it out. D, G, A, D. Suspended 4th. He's going to go down to the suspended 2nd. Right? And then up to the 3rd. Right? Suspended 4. Suspended 2nd. Major 3rd. Right? There's our strong voicing.